My name is Mike Haig. I'm the project director of a pioneering new operation called Wreck Hunters, and we aim to teach the skills and techniques of diving archaeology in the crystal clear waters of the Caribbean on a tiny island called Utila. The home for our project is an 18th century wreck lying in no more than 18 meters of water, a sort of vast underwater classroom. But I'm here today standing by the propeller and rudder of the SS Great Britain. Launched in 1843, she was described as the greatest experiment since creation. Why? Because she had so many innovations, and I'm standing in front of one. Back in those days, most large craft were powered by paddles. An example would be the SS Central America, which went down in a storm off Florida in the late 1850s, carrying back the 49ers from California. She, in fact, is one of the most famous wrecks in the world, being one of the richest wrecks in the world. But when Brunel designed the SS Great Britain, such a system was not for him. He looked to the latest innovators in maritime technology, and he went for the screw propeller. The 6-blade screw propeller behind me. Now, the propeller here is a replica. In fact, built fairly soon after the SS Great Britain was brought back. Now, the advantages of a screw propeller are many. First thing is that it's lighter than paddle steamers, so therefore able to cost less. It's more aerodynamic or sea dynamic, so she can run through the seas at a much lower angle and therefore saving fuel. It also saves space because, of course, without the paddles, you've got more room for cargo. Also, the screw propeller could be lifted up and down to deal with different sea conditions. And one of the most important factors was the fact that it was cheaper. So in all these areas, the screw propeller gave the SS Great Britain a great advantage over the paddle steamers of her day. And in diving archaeology, we look for these innovations to help us as well. One of our biggest problems, of course, is what is below the wreck site we have found. Because normally, what we normally see is some superstructure, some wood, something, but not too sure of the extent of the wreck or what might even be there. And we can use underwater metal detectors to give us a better idea of what is there so we can focus our initial investigations. And so in this particular session of my series, we'll be looking at the underwater metal detector and how, as archaeologists, we can use it as one of our important tools. In this section, we're going to look at the component parts of an underwater metal detector. And for this purpose, we have chosen the Aquascan AQ1B unit, one of the most powerful units available today on the market. The key part of the system is the control box, control unit. I'm always told off by Aquascan for calling it the battery pack, which it is, but it also does a whole lot more. It has a running life of 10 hours. Now, my advice to you if you're going somewhere remotely in the field is to take 2, because you really can't replace this stuff out there without going back to Aquascan, and they're basically based in Wales and in Florida. The unit itself will run for 10 hours off this battery pack, and it will sense any ferrous material 3 meters away from the coils. So very powerful. Some people ask me, can you tweak the system? Can you make sure you're getting your precious material rather than your Coke can? The answer is no. The only way to do that, if you do that, all that happens is you miss stuff. So you simply leave it on the most sensitive setting you can and get on with it. Now, here we have the biggest size coil you can get, 35 centimeters. Covers a huge area. And if you're using it for survey, and we are, then what you can do is you cover a huge area with this, plot what you find, and then move to a much smaller unit, which is 20 centimeters, to fine-tune those readings, to really find out where the material is to do a better survey job, and then you can base your decisions on where you take it from there. You'll notice these have very strong Ike-Light cords. The only real weak system of an underwater metal detector system will be divers ripping cords out. So tell your divers to be very careful with these things because, again, they're difficult to replace or repair in the field. So you can have a huge area, you can use your large coil to cover that area, get a big picture, and then go back with your smaller coil to get more detail. Now the thing is, if you're hand holding one of these things for a long time, they could become quite tiring on the arms. So it's a really good idea to invest in one of these units here, which is an arm rest, basically. So you put your hand through there, and that gives it a lot more support. What you can also do, if you don't want to mount this on your waist, is actually it's got a place to place the control unit as well. So you've got it all in one hand. Very neat, very tidy way of doing things. And you can extend the system here because you have the upper and lower parts, so you can imagine it. That goes into there. You've got your metal detector on the end of that, and off you go for many hours of plotting and working. Now, there are just some parts of the world, some parts of the seabed where metal detector doesn't work because it's not flat. So what do you do then? Well, what you do then is you use a probe, high power probe. Now this can get into crevices, to all sorts of areas. It's quite robust. So you can get your readings from that. Coral, brilliant for coral, because coral forms over wrecks and makes it more impossible to find. But with those things, you can cut through all that stuff and get to what you want. Obviously, you need to be able to tell what you're getting. How do you do that? The traditional way of sensing was using what's called a bone phone. What happens is that you place the bone phone to your jaw. Well, in the old days you did, but now we did it around our ear, and it'll pick up the vibration which you get when the detector goes over a metallic substance. That's fine. That's great. But in warmer waters, not in colder water, but in warmer waters, we have headphones, like the ones you'd normally use anywhere else. Very comfortable, and you can use it for many, many hours. A much better system because you get to hear what's going on, so you can sense what is a small reading or a large reading over particular areas. A great advantage. And finally, for very difficult conditions when bone phones or even headphones are in use, we have the palm coil. And literally what you do with this little unit is you have it in the palm of your hand, under your glove, and it will go off when you're sensing terrace material. These units are not cheap. They are reasonably expensive. But when you think of the time that you will save pinpointing the areas of your site that you need to work on more or look at first, then they are truly invaluable. So it's well worth investing, if you can, in an underwater metal detector. Having looked at the component parts of an underwater metal detector, I'd like now to move on to some of the questions people frequently ask about them. The first one, obviously, is how do they actually work? Well, the unit that we use, which is the Aquascan AQ1B, which I have rigged up just like this, is called a pulse induction metal detector. What that actually means is that a very strong DC current is sent out, hundreds of cycles per second, in a transmit and receive cycle. Now, direct current pulses go in a straight line, although their value may change. And what happens, if they hit a contact, a bit of metal, then you get what's called an eddy current set up. Now, an eddy current is like an eddy in a stream. You find that swirling sensation, and that creates more energy. And that energy comes back. And it comes back in the form of an increase in power. So when you're listening in, either on the headphones, which are these here, or sometimes on a bone phone, you will hear an audible signal change from a pulse to a continuous tone. And the stronger the tone, the greater is the size of the object you found. That's basically how they work. The next question, of course, is how do they differ from land ones? Well, land metal detectors in the main are called VLF, very low frequency detectors. They don't look much different to underwater metal detector, frankly, but they work very differently. What happens? They have a battery. The battery sends down a power to the coil. The coil is the circular thing here. And that creates a little magnetic field. And that magnetic field, when it goes over an object, goes through the object, and the object itself gets a little metallic field. And on the receive cycle, that's picked up. And again, either audible or sometimes on a screen, that's shown. The problem is that VLF metal detector's signal is absorbed heavily by salt water. It doesn't work. Works fine in fresh water, not in salt water. So that's why for salt water you need PI, pulse induction metal detectors, to make the thing go. So that's the key to between the two. The other slight difference is that with land metal detectors, you've actually got to make a motion over the object for it to be picked up by the detector. The PI detectors will pick up a metal object whether they're moving or not. Third question is, can you sort of make these metal detectors more sensitive so they can just pick up valuable coins rather than drinks cans? The answer is, on land, very much so. If you set your land detector to 4 kilohertz, it will pick up large metal objects. If you set it to 16 kilohertz, it'll pick up coins, and also it'll pick up the difference between the coins and the drink cans. But I previously said, underwater, this does not work. If you reduce sensitivity on a PI metal detector, you'll just miss stuff, so don't do it. Also, you might find, and we have found, that sometimes you detect ferrous objects, that's things like cast iron, they contain iron, and they can be shielding, covering non-ferrous, things like brass and silver. So that's another important reason not to bring the sensitivity down. Final question is asked, what's being found with these things? Of course, the great excitement goes to the treasure hunters rather than the archaeologists. The Greg Bounds down in Florida, the Brent Brisden with the 1715 treasure fleet, where they found and recovered $4.5 million worth of coin in one day. But we are archaeologists, not treasure hunters. For us, all that glitters is not gold. And metal detectors have a long history in diving archaeology. Back to 1970 with the Carenia shipwreck, where the lead sheathing of the wreck was only found with the metal detector. More recently, 2019, a team of Italian divers working at 90 meters on a Roman wreck recovered swords and other artifacts using the Aqua 1B units. And a shipwreck I know very well myself, the Giglio Etruscan wreck, was only relocated 20 years after being found originally by Reg Valentine by the use of an underwater metal detector. The then oldest shipwreck in the world, found again by a tool most people link to looking for sunken gold. And next time, we're going to look at how photomosaics can help the underwater archaeologist. So until then, I wish you all safe and enjoyable diving.